Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Life with the Lisenbees. I'm Hunter.
And I'm Sammy, and today we are talking about putting your spouse first and sharing practical ways of how you can do that, because Hunter and I, being Christians, we truly believe that a family order is God first, then your spouse, then your kids, and we're going to share with you how to do that.
And it's tough. You can get busy throughout life, but we're going to try to explain and give our best advice of how you can do this. So stick with us, and we'll see you on the other side.
So, Hunter, when it comes to putting your spouse before your kids, how was this modeled for you as a kid? I want us to answer from both of our perspectives of how we were raised. In your household when you were raised, was it God, spouse, kids, or what did it look like?
It was probably kids, spouse, then God. And I don't think that turned out the best, sadly. But
it's relatable. It's just real.
No, yeah, it's not easy.
Real.
It's so hard to put God first in your marriage, and then it's not easy putting your spouse before your kids because you want what's best for your kids, because it's something that literally that is your blood, and your spouse technically isn't your blood. So it's right away your spouse is already at an uneven playing level, So
well, it's like that saying, you have to love your kids.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to love your spouse. You have to choose to love your spouse.
Yeah.
But you're kind of forced to love your kids.
Yeah. And so I think for my parents, it was more so the kids first, spouse second, and then God third. And I really think my parents would have worked out a lot better had it been God, spouse, and kids. And I love my parents, but it's just that wasn't the order they had. And I think us trying to do God first, spouse second, and then kids third, I think is going to help us so much in the long run. And I think it helps most marriages in the long run. Not just helps, it is the reason, it's the foundation. So
yeah. And for me growing up, it started like that as well. Like you were saying in your family upbringing, when I was first being raised, it was kids, spouse, and then God from two different perspectives. Because my mom was modeling God first to us, but my dad wasn't. So it was so unequally yoked in the first 5 to 10 years of my childhood.
Yeah.
So mom would model God first. She would take us to church. She would pray with us. She would lead in that. And then she would put my dad second, and then she would put us third. But then my dad had it completely opposite. So it was confusing. And then once my dad received Jesus and became a believer, then in my teen years, they modeled for us then God, spouse, kids.
Could you see the big change when you were younger? Do you still remember that, or were you a little bit younger, too young to really remember it being?
I mean, no, I
kid,
remember
spouse,
being,
God.
5, 6, 7 years old, and my mom taking us to Bible study, taking us to church, signing us up for kid church camps, doing devotionals with us, praying with us, talking to us about God, praying with us before we go to bed. And she had this passion and desire for Christ and was praying so deeply for my dad to be saved and to come to know him. And she modeled that so well for us. But because we didn't see that from my dad's side, we always just kind of questioned why. And so then it wasn't until obviously he then made that decision for himself. And then we grew up and we all made that decision for ourselves as well. But I remember receiving Jesus when I was 6 or 7 years old, at church with my mom there. And then, my dad got to baptize me when I was a teenager and stuff. But it really is interesting to hear every child is raised differently. And you could have been raised kind of similar to me or similar to Hunter, where it was completely opposite and it was completely out of order. And now you are a parent, you are married, and guess what? You get to decide. It's your choice, the order that you want to raise your family in. You don't have to follow the patterns of how you were raised.
Yeah.
You get to make that decision.
For you, I'm sure it was probably pretty confusing having half and half, because then you're well, which way is the right way? Luckily, your parents were able to both be balanced. I would say at least one good thing about my parents, they were both aligned with how they were doing it. It was kids, spouse. It wasn't one was God, kids, or one wasn't spouse, kids. It was at least both aligned, so I wasn't super confused. So it's you have your goods and your bads, but not putting God first doesn't help either.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it's just real. It's relatable. We'd love to hear from you guys.
Yeah.
How were you raised, and what are you choosing to do now as a parent or as an adult? I think that's a good open discussion we should have in the comments of this video, to just get to know how you were raised, and if it was similar to me or similar to Hunter.
Yeah.
But when we say this whole concept of you're putting your spouse before your kids, I think we need to clarify what that is and what that isn't, because I think the first thing that people assume is like, your kids can't come before your spouse. Your kids depend on you for everything, right? Like when they're a newborn, when they're a baby, we're about to have a baby, right? Like literally the baby can't live if we don't care for the baby, and we don't feed the baby, and we don't be with the baby 24/7. You know what I mean? So it's like, what does it actually look like practically to put your spouse
I think a lot of people
think
it's like physically, like putting your spouse, always being next to your spouse.
Right. And that's not
like,
what it is.
if a train was going down, you're grabbing your spouse first before you're grabbing your kids. That's not what it's about. It's not about like, when the plane crashes, you're protecting your spouse instead of your kid. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking more spiritually. We're talking more mentally. We're just talking about growing with your spouse and not forgetting your spouse. And when you truly can establish this just ground and this good base of showing your kids like, hey, I'm putting my spouse first, I think it just shows them like, okay, I respect that.
100%.
This is something I can look up to and I'm influenced by.
I mean, it's literally our job to model to our kids what a godly marriage is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
If you don't model it for them, they're not going to know who to look for in a spouse and then what to do when they get married.
Yep.
And so practically, like when we say that your spouse comes before your child, we're not saying that your child's needs are going to go unmet.
Exactly.
We're not saying that whatsoever. And also putting your spouse before your kids doesn't mean you love your spouse more. It doesn't. Like, you love your spouse very differently than you love your kids. There's enough room in your heart to love both of them. There's different love there for them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love Lily like I love you, because that would be very weird.
That would be very weird. And also, putting your spouse first doesn't mean your kids get less time with you. It's not about time.
And that's what, I think most people think time. They think physical time. They think whatever it may be.
You can still prioritize your marriage while most of your time is spent caring for your kids. Because the reality is, in the early years, in the first 18 years of their life, right? Like, you're going to be spending so much time caring for your kids, especially until they're in school and they're dependent and they're driving and they're teenagers. Your kids need you, to live. So it's like, just because you are meeting your child's need doesn't mean you're not able to prioritize your spouse first. You're not going to neglect your kids. You're not going to leave them hanging. You're not going to abuse your kids by choosing to put your spouse first.
Yeah.
I saw this quote when I was just kind of looking up some Bible verses as well for this podcast. And the quote says that putting my husband first looks like saving a little of yourself each day. So all this quote means is like, when you are given a choice, your spouse should come first.
Yeah.
So like, I'm trying to think of a good example of this.
Well, I mean, like today, I feel like when I got home, it was more like you had like no energy. You're like, I'm done with today. It's like, it's been a long day. And like, usually Sam does really well with like, as soon as I get home, she saves a little bit to have a smile on her face, no matter how bad her and Lily's day was.
I just got a really upsetting text right before you walked in the door. So that
I knew something was up, because I was like, this is,
well, because I was on my phone, and then I was like, can you go get dressed? I have to handle this. And it just sucks, right? When you're like in this great mood, or you're having a good day or whatever, and then you get this disappointing text, and then Hunter came home and I was trying to just like get over it and process it within that 5 minutes, and it just lingered.
Just bad timing.
Yeah.
But that's what it looks like, right? It's like when your husband gets home, like for me, when I first get home, I hug Lily, but I don't kiss Lily first. I kiss Sam first. Then I kiss Lily.
Yeah.
Like that's always
the only reason you
goal.
hug Lily first is she beats me to the door.
Lily runs up to me before Sam.
I don't have a choice. I'm wobbling around like a pregnant whale here, and Lily's like, Dad! She's like darting to the door.
So that's just, something like that is just a simple way of putting your spouse first, like greeting your spouse before you greet your children.
Yeah.
Or saying, making sure you say goodbye to your spouse and not just your children whenever you're leaving out the door.
It's having this awareness and consciously always thinking about just your spouse. And we actually have some practical ways that you can put your spouse first. We have 15 practical ways to put your spouse first that we thought of. And so these are just tangible things. Like if you're going to take anything away from this podcast or this YouTube, it's like take away one of these 15 points that we're going to give you and start implementing it in your everyday. Hunter just said it. Like your spouse comes through the door, like be excited, greet them. I sucked at that today. But I typically do a very good job of it. So that's a great example of basically when your kids are around, like prioritizing and not like being crazy intimate, but like hugging, kissing, and being present with your spouse in front of your kids. So here's number one. Your kids go to bed every night, I hope. When your kids go to bed, that's your time. It was actually very serious to me and Hunter when we had our daughter Lily that she slept in her own room after 4 or 5 months.
We wanted our room, our bed to be our space.
We were very strict about sleep training to protect our marriage.
Yeah.
It wasn't because we didn't, and also we wanted our daughter to have the best sleep, and we truly felt like sleep training was going to give her that, and it has. She sleeps 12 hours a night, and she has since she was 5 months old, and it's worked really well for us. But from day one, I told Hunter we're not bed sharing. Lily is not going to be sleeping in the bed with us, and she's going to be in her own room. And I know that there's a lot of conflicting opinions, beliefs, things that work for different families. And so in no way are we saying that you can't bed share with your kids and still prioritize your spouse. We're just saying from me and Hunter's perspective to protect our bedroom and that space, she needed to be in her own room. And that has, oh my gosh, transformed our marriage because she goes to bed at the same time every night.
Yep.
And when she goes to bed,
it's our time.
It's our time.
Yeah.
We get 3 to 4 hours of alone time every single night. And when I talk to my mom friends that their babies bed share with them, or their toddlers or their kids bed share with them, their kids may not be going to bed until 10 p.m. when they go to bed. And so it's like your kid is up hanging out with you and your spouse the entire time. And if you love that and it's working for you, awesome. I'm just saying from our lifestyle and our family, that's not going to work for us. And Hunter bed shared with his mom for a very long time. So
I did.
I'm sure that you, honestly, from the kids' perspective, maybe can speak to a second how that could have interfered your parents' relationship. Do you feel like it did?
No, 100% did. I mean, we obviously I didn't sleep in her bed in forever, but I did sleep in their room on the ground until I was like 10 years old, and that's a long time.
That's a very long time.
But I can't imagine, like, my parents would never, I'm sure they never had intimacy or anything like that when I'm in there.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I go in there every single night, and why would they ever want that while I'm laying on the ground? And yes, I laid on this ground, this carpet every single night. I was too scared to go to the room. I don't know what it was. It probably the scary movies I was watching when growing up, but
has to be.
I had a haunted room too when I was like 1 year old. So, did you know that?
Hunter's just been through it as a kid.
So, yeah, I had a haunted room. I had like toys that you wound up.
You told me that.
And like they would go off in the middle. The only way you could get them to go off was if you wound them up. And so literally they'd go off in the middle of the night. Like, yeah, so I was scared growing up. So I would sleep on the ground.
My bedroom was blessed with holy water and highly favored, and I did not have any issues.
So
with
the point that we're getting across is your room should be your space, your bed should be your space, and that's that. And so number 2 is really setting boundaries with kids' activities.
We haven't got there yet because our kids aren't in sports yet, music yet. But eventually we're going to get there when our kids want to do all the things.
It's even doing things like, I think of it in this terms of like, when you go out on the weekend, you don't always have to go to a kids thing. You don't always have to go to the playground. You don't always have to go play to a water park. Like, your kid can come with you when you go on a bike ride with your spouse. That's kind of an adult thing.
Or you just go to lunch.
Or if you go to the beach, right? That's not just a kid activity. Or you go to lunch, right? Like, it's not just basing it all around the kids. And I think sometimes people try to just do the kids' activities, whether it's go to like a play that's just for the kids, or go to the playground that's just for the kids, or play games that are just for the kids. Like, your kids can come with you, and that's okay. I'm not telling you not to do any of those things. I'm just saying
you can do both.
Have boundaries.
You can do both because it's like you don't want your kids to think the world revolves around them and they always get what they want, because then you're just going to raise obnoxious kids. Number 3, serve your spouse first at mealtime. This is something that I've been really trying to make a point of is I cook dinner for us, 4 nights a week while Hunter works, and I always make Lily's plate and I always make Hunter's plate. And I'll have Hunter's plate ready. I'll have Lily's plate ready too, but she doesn't eat until after we pray. But I just feel like showing Lily that, like, I get my plate ready, I get Daddy's plate ready, and I get your plate ready, is like showing her that, like, I make your plate, and once she's old enough for her to really understand, like, I'm gonna serve him first and then I'm gonna serve you.
Yeah.
That's just a really good practical thing to do, serving your spouse first at mealtime and showing
And it's
them.
so small, but it's also something that they can see.
Yeah.
So that leads to number 4, which is not letting your kid put your spouse against the other spouse.
Ugh.
So, and it's really just like letting your kid say, hey, Mom, can I go to the park, right? Obviously, we're not there yet. We have a toddler that doesn't speak much, but it's like your kid coming to you saying, hey, can I go to the park? And you say no, and then going to the other spouse saying, hey, can I go to the park? And you're like, yes. And then you guys are going to go against each other because you're like, wait, I said no.
Mhm.
I said yes. So I can already see that with Lily. When she is doing something bad, she looks at us and she'll do something bad and look at you.
Yes.
And then if she sees you get upset and be like, no, you can't do that, she'll look at me like,
Yep.
is it okay, Dad? Like, can I do this?
Hunter
like,
and
are you?
I think, have done a really good job at this so far.
If one of us say no, we hear it, we're just
100%.
like, absolutely
with
not.
Hunter and I, as Lily has became a crazy, toddler who's starting to just get into things, I've noticed when Hunter says no, I say no. When I say no, Hunter says no. Like,
and sometimes we disagree, but it's more so like to each other. Like, we're like, but then we go along with it, and then later we'll talk about it.
Yeah,
and
like,
be
we'll
hey.
go along with it, and then we'll talk about it. And I think what it comes down to is, in the moment, if you disagree, don't make it like you can disagree and show your kids an argument in a healthy manner and overcome that argument in front of them, because it's good for them to see you argue healthy or in a healthy way. We've talked about this before. They need to see you argue in a healthy way. But when it comes to always your kids having a favorite parent, like, your kids should not have a favorite parent. When I was growing up, I had a favorite parent who gave me whatever I wanted, always said yes, always nurtured. It was my mom. Mothers are typically the nurturers. Fathers are typically the disciplinarians. That's also, kind of the biblical order of what it shows. But my parents were super disaligned in saying yes and no when I was growing up. I knew I could go to my mom, and my mom would basically always give me what I wanted. And my dad wouldn't. So it's like, you have to model for them from a very young age that, like, we're a team. We're a team. Like, you can't break up the team. And I saw this TikTok the other day that I wanted to bring up because they made such a good point in it. And they were saying how their, like, 3-year-old was asking for a snack and mom said no. And then the 3-year-old went to dad and said, Dad, can I have a snack? And the 5-year-old went up to her 3-year-old sister and said, you can't do that. You can't break up the team. You can't go ask Dad now that mom just said no. And Dad saw it and went, oh my gosh, they get it. They're understanding that, like, when one parent says something, it's firm. And that's a 5-year-old. The 3-year-old didn't get it, obviously, but the 5-year-old is telling her sister, you can't do that. And I'm sure that's going to stick with her now to know she can't do that. So, like, they're watching. You got to be consistent with it, but make sure your kids don't pit you against each other, because you're a team.
Yeah, it's very important.
Reason number 5, place boundaries so children don't interrupt conversations with your spouse. My parents actually modeled this really, really well. And when me and my siblings were growing up, we'd get super annoyed with it because my parents would never allow us to interrupt them. They would be having a full-on conversation and we'd be like, Mom, 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 Dad, 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 Dad. And we'd try to interrupt their conversation after they've had, like, no time together for the whole day, obviously. And we were just being kids, needing something, wanting something, whatever. And my parents would look at us and say, we are speaking right now. You can wait until we are finished speaking, and then we will address you. Like, they basically be like, is it an emergency? Are you dying? Do you need us? No? Okay, we're having an adult conversation, and we will be done in a moment. And me and my siblings would then shut up, and we would respect that. So place those boundaries with your children and tell your children, hey, when mommy and daddy are in a serious conversation or we're talking about something, obviously your kids can interrupt you when you're having normal family fun discussions, but it's like when you're really intentionally talking with your spouse, set those boundaries so your kids can't just interrupt and you then neglect your spouse and put your spouse second and your kids' needs first, when it's typically not an emergency when our kids need us.
Yeah, I love that. It's good. Number 6, is that what we're on?
Mm-hmm.
Number 6, if your wife or husband is a coffee drinker, make them coffee.
Or
it's a small
tea,
thing.
or
a
any
tea,
beverage.
whatever it may be, just do that small thing and do it with your child too. Let them know that you're, putting your spouse, you're making them coffee, and you're doing something that appreciates them. Whatever it may be, just do it. Like for Mother's Day, I did a whole little cooking thing with Lily.
Go
because
see it on our TikTok.
I wanted her,
awesome.
I wanted her to understand that we're making this for her mom. This isn't for Lily. This isn't about her. It's about her mom, and that's how it should be every day, not just on Mother's Day, right?
Yeah.
Just it depends on, am I going to be up in the morning with
But
Lily?
the weekends are like Hunter's time to do those kinds of things for me. If my husband was a coffee drinker, then I'd happily have his coffee ready for him in the morning, but he's not. So
I've tried.
I have to find other ways. I have to find other ways. Like, for example, at nighttime, especially on the weekends when Hunter eats sweets, like I'll go downstairs and I'll make our ice cream, or I'll make our dessert, or I'll make something. Obviously, Lily's sleeping by that point, but like me and Hunter are really good about equally just getting things for each other.
Yeah.
Like if he's going downstairs, I'm going to be like, hey, make my tea, please, and take the dogs out. And he already knows. So it's like just those little things mean so much to the other person. And
to the
so
other person,
often we forget that it's just the little things.
Yeah.
And if your kids are awake, they should see you modeling that for them.
Absolutely.
That leads me to number 7. If he has a busy schedule, pack his lunch. This is something that I used to do religiously for Hunter when he was taking my leftover food to work. But now he fasts and has a different eating schedule and doesn't eat lunch. But when Hunter was eating lunch at work, I always would make sure that he had food for the next day. And I'd always tell him, it's in the fridge. Do not forget it. He'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, and I'd always be like, get your lunch. Your lunch is in the fridge. And now that he doesn't eat lunch during the day, it's harder for me to do that. But again, there are always small little things when it comes to food or drinks that you can do. And your kids can participate in this to tell them, hey, this is for your dad, or this is for your mom.
And number 8, it's all about kissing and hugging, which we kind of already talked about. Just showing that display of affection.
Hands,
Just showing that display of affection in front of your children. It's important. It's not gross. Like, it's okay if you kiss. It's okay if you hug. Like, that is a normal thing.
Oh my gosh, Lily loves it. Every single day when Hunter gets home, Lily runs up to Hunter. Hunter picks her up. Hunter hugs Lily, and then Hunter comes straight over to me and kisses me. And when Hunter comes over to me and kisses me, Lily grabs my neck, and she'll grab my head and Hunter's head, and she'll bring our faces together. And she's like, kiss, kiss, kiss. And it's just the sweetest thing because, like, she's right there, and we're not kissing her. Like, we're not acknowledging her in that moment. We're focused on each other, but she gets to be, like, a part of the family hug and the family moment.
Just knowing what's going on.
And knowing what's going on. And that's super important. You know, when you're out and about with your family holding hands. And honestly, growing up, I loved seeing when my parents would show affection. It would make me as the kid be like, oh, my parents really love each other. And they're really, like, they just love each other. And that as a kid makes you feel so awesome to have parents that love each other. Next is flirt throughout the day. Send those texts. Send those emojis and those texts that just connect you guys. I mean, Hunter and I have fun with this. We do a good job. Like yesterday, I took a picture in the car, just a selfie, because I felt pretty. And I texted it to Hunter, and I was like, I feel so pretty today. And he was like, dang, you look good. And look at your hair. And it's just fun to flirt and to be texting with your spouse.
Just don't get
like
comfortable. Don't get comfortable. There's no reason for it. It's not saying don't get comfortable because your spouse is going to leave you. It's just saying don't get comfortable because your spouse wants to hear you tell her.
Yeah, they want to hear
them
especially
that you love them, that you think they're sexy.
Yes.
So
tell them they
don't
look
forget
good
to say it.
and send it over text. Yeah, that's so important.
All right, what is number? We're going to skip number
Well, yeah, we already
10,
went through number 10. Make your bedroom a no-kid zone. So now
Number
we're on number
11. Say I love you in front of your kids. That is huge. Don't just tell your child you love them. Tell your spouse in front of your kids and make it a purpose. Like, literally be like, hey, Sam, I love you. Lily, hold a minute. I love you, Sam. So
Right.
Just make it a point.
No, that's so good. I think those words of affirmation and making it intentional is everything. Number 12 is never leave without a kiss goodbye or a hug goodbye.
Yeah. And we talked about this a little bit earlier.
So important. I mean, you never know, like, when it could be your last, when something could happen in your family, but also it's like modeling for your kids that, like, when dad goes to work, when mom leaves for the day, whatever it may be, we say goodbye and we hug and we kiss and then we go on our way.
All right. Number 13, ask and honor their opinion. So ask what their opinion is and honor it. Don't just
Your spouses.
decline it. Your spouses. Don't just decline their opinion just because you don't like it, especially not in front of the spouse or in front of your kids. Let them know that you value their opinion. If you disagree, that's okay, but just value it. Like ask, hey, why do you want it that way? Or, okay, yeah, let's
And this could be about
see
anything.
how we could do it
This
that
could
way.
be about something in your home. This could be about a scheduling issue. This could be about where you're going to go spend your weekend. I mean, when there's a discussion that's going on where you guys have different opinions or you're wanting to just talk to your spouse, it's like respecting their opinion in front of your kids
Yeah,
is super important.
it's very important.
And
So-
then number 14, devote time away without your kids. So your kids need to see you go take an overnight. Your
Yeah.
kids need to see you go on date night. They need to see you prioritize your spouse, before them. Because before you had your kids, that was something you were already doing regularly.
Yep.
You were going on overnight dates. You were going on date nights. You were going on day dates. Things shifted, things changed when you had kids, but that doesn't mean that you then don't do those things anymore.
Yep.
You have to do them because your kids will see the importance of those dates and putting your spouse first in that way.
And very last, pray for your spouse. It's probably the most important thing to do. Always pray for your spouse. Of course, pray for your kids as well, but praying for your spouse is huge. You can do that in ways of praying for your spouse in front of your kids as well. You can pray with your kids and pray for your spouse in that moment as well. It's
Yes.
just showing how important your spouse is in front of your kids, and that's very big. It's
And Hunter,
necessary.
every night when Hunter prays, like over our food, over our meal, he always like prays for me, and he'll always be like, thank you, Lord, for Sam, for cooking this meal for us, for taking care of Lily today, for cleaning the house, like whatever it may be. He always says something about me in the prayer. And every night when I put Lily to bed, well, we rotate, but the nights I put Lily to bed, when I pray over her, I always, as she's like still looking up at me, I'm always saying, thank you, God, for Hunter and for the way that he loves Lily and the way that he cares for Lily and the way that he plays with Lily. And like, I'm always making it a point to Lily during the day. And when I put her down, like just who Daddy is, I'm always talking about Daddy. I'm always like, we'll talk about Hunter all throughout the day, just so that she's aware of like who you are. And I think she knows.
Yeah.
I think she knows who you
Every
are.
day I come home, da-da.
She knows who you are to her, and she knows who you are to me.
Yep.
'Cause it's very different. There's a lot of benefits to putting your spouse first. I mean, we just talked through all these practical ways, but the benefit is you're educating your child that you're setting an example of a godly marriage.
Yeah.
They need to see an example of a godly marriage, because if you don't model it, who is going to model it for them? Like, it is our call and our responsibility to model it for them. It also shows them that having kids is not going to destroy your marriage. I mean, how many people say our marriage was so great, and then we had kids, and then it got all crazy, and then we got a divorce, and kids just ruined it all. Like, I've heard so many divorce stories of the kids being the reason.
Yep.
Or you're not pursuing each other anymore, but you just stay together for the kids.
I mean, that happens all the time. They forget about their spouse, and they only focus on their kids. They think about what's best for their kids. They don't think about what's best for their spouse and their kids. Like for me, I always think about what's best for my family, and it's not really just my family. It's you and Lily, right? So it's putting you first and then Lily. It's always thinking in that way, and I think a lot of people say, what's best for my kids? And yes, I'm not telling you not to think that. It's just, and we're not being like, I don't know what the word is, but we're not ignorant to the fact that we're not at that age where Lily could be 13 years old and things change. We understand things are going to change as our kids get older, but we also understand that we have this foundation right now, and we're going to do our best to stick to this because we know that this is what's going to change our marriage and be amazing throughout the long run. And I think a lot of people forget about this stuff. I think they say, what's best for my kids, and that's all they focus on.
Yep.
And then what happens when they do that is then God starts to fall down the totem pole, and it goes from kids, God, then spouse, and then you have kids, spouse, God.
Right.
Because then you're like, wait, I can't put my spouse above my kid, but hey, maybe I can put my spouse above God.
Yep.
Next thing you know, God's at the bottom, your marriage is falling apart, and your kid's upset because now you guys got a divorce and
Right.
you're not together. So you ended up being the worst thing possible.
100%. And it's like, you get 18 years to raise your child,
Yep.
and then they're off on their own. And then who are you left with? Your spouse.
You're going to have 30, 40 years together.
Like you get 18 years with your kids, but you get a lot more years with your spouse before kids and after kids. And I know 18 years is a lot, but it's like in those 18 years, you have to remember your responsibility of showing and modeling for them who they're supposed to look for. Do you want them to fall into the same pattern that you modeled for them if you came from a broken family or a divorced family, or your parents just stayed together but hated each other and didn't love each other, but they just did it for the kids? Like, do you want to fall into that pattern, or do you want to rewrite your story, or do you want to model it differently? And so it's like always remembering that, like, you have to prioritize your spouse first, because once they move out, it's just you and your spouse.
And
how many times do empty nesters then go, who are you?
Who are you? Who are you?
Like, who even are you?
Who are you?
Like, we live together, we may sleep next to each other, but I don't know who you are anymore.
What's your favorite ice cream now? I don't remember. It's
been
a while.
18 years.
You still like mint chocolate chip? Is that still something you like? I don't know.
But like, what does the Bible say? The Bible says that when you get married, you leave your father and mother and you become one flesh with your spouse. You're
not one with your child. It doesn't say you give birth and you become one with your child. Let's not forget that. I think a lot of people think they become one with their child because it's coming from them.
You're like,
and I could see how easy it is to put your kid first. It seems so easy because it's like,
it's
how
very
can you be
easy.
mad at a little kid who is the most innocent little thing?
You're self-sufficient.
Yeah,
you don't
exactly.
need
You
me
don't
to live.
Exactly.
Lily needs me to survive.
I may need you. You know. So.
But you know what I mean.
No.
Like,
I gotcha.
It's so easy to neglect your spouse because you're like, they've got it.
Yeah.
They know how to cook and clean and get dressed and go to the bathroom, and they don't need a diaper change, and they can pay the bills and they can go to work.
No.
Your kids can't.
Yep.
It's like 100% that mindset. But like, you're one flesh with your spouse. And Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 5, it says, "Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might." This verse is showing us that, like, we are called to make a total commitment to loving and living for God above anything else in our life. So, like, we have to live for Christ before our spouses and before our kids. I mean, God created man and woman in the beginning, and he created woman out of man. And he made us different, right? He made you male and he made me female. And then we get married, we become one flesh. It says in Mark, what God has joined together, let no one separate.
Yeah, that's good.
Especially your kids should not be the one to separate you.
Yeah.
Because you're the model for them. You're the example for them. And then some other verses that I just want to share that are super encouraging about putting God first and then your spouse first, because it doesn't specifically say in the Bible, like, God comes first, then your spouse comes second, then your kids come third. I mean, how awesome would it be if it was just like
layered out like that? Yeah.
But like, we can really see through Paul in Ephesians and through a lot of these scriptures how it's modeled for us. Ephesians is where that verse that I just referenced, like, a father leaves his, or a man leaves his father and mother and becomes one flesh. That's in Ephesians.
Yep.
Paul also talks in Ephesians about wives submitting to your husbands as you do to the Lord. The husband is the head of the wife, just like Christ is the head of the church. And so as the church submits to Christ, wives should submit to their husbands and everything. It doesn't say wives submit to your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever your kid needs, you're supposed to just do whatever they need and whatever they want. No, it says submit to your husband. So if your husband says, no, you can't do that, and your kid is like, but mommy, I want to do that, and they're looking at you with those puppy dog eyes, and your spouse is like, this is not smart for us, whether it's a financial, there's a reason your spouse is saying no. So it's like, you have to submit to your husband and your spouse in that situation, because your husband is guiding you just like how Christ guides the church.
Amen.
That's the example that your husband should be modeling, just like Christ modeled for us.
Amen.
And then, I think that's some good scripture references. Ephesians 5 verse 21, Ephesians 5:22 through 24. Just go read the book of Ephesians, and Paul will share
lay it all
with
out
you
for you
Paul will share with you the purpose and the meaning behind marriage, how to navigate marriage, the priorities of marriage, and how God created really just marriage to look like in a godly perspective. So, I mean, that's really it today for our podcast about putting your spouse before your kids, but ultimately putting God first. And I know we shared those 15 practical ways to put your spouse first, but I just want to close with like remembering practical ways to put God first, even before your spouse. And the practical ways that you put God first before your spouse or with your spouse is praying with your spouse.
Very big.
And reading the Bible with your spouse, having your own personal devotional prayer time without your spouse, doing groups with your spouse, going to church with your spouse, going every Sunday, going to church as a family. Like, those are ways that you're modeling with your spouse to your kids how God comes first. So those are some practical things to always remember is like when your kid's not around and your husband's not around, how are you living your life for Christ first? You have to be in his word. You have to be praying. You have to be seeking him. You have to be in community with other believers so that you're not feeling alone in your struggles or in what you're going through.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you said it all. I think you hit every point that you needed to hit. And yeah.
All right, you guys. So that is it for today's episode on ways to put your spouse first. We want to hear your feedback of just what practical tip was new for you, what stuck out to you. Drop it in the comments. Share with us over on Instagram at Life with the Lisenbees, where you can follow us. And then just make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube, Apple, Spotify podcast, because we release new episodes every single Monday. We have been super consistent in dropping a podcast every single Monday. We're so excited to keep growing and expanding the podcast, but also we know in what we teach you guys and what we've learned about prioritizing God, your spouse, your kids. The podcast kind of falls at priority number like
8?
10.
Like it's way
8
down there.
to 10 on the priority list
Yeah.
in our life right now. And so we love doing this and we're going to continue to do this. But as we transition over the next 1 to 2 months, we're probably only going to be releasing like maybe 2 podcasts a month. We're probably going to switch things up. Instead of doing every week, we're going to do maybe every other. So just continue to follow us over on Instagram at Life with Lisenbees. That's how you can stay engaged. You can get updates when the podcast is dropping. You can engage with our reels, share them to your story, comment on them. Like seriously, it's so fun and it helps us grow and just reach more people. We won't have an episode next week for Memorial Day. So come back in 2 weeks where we will have an episode for you. And if you have an idea,
send them over. This one came from somebody that reached out and said, hey, I want to know how to put like your spouse first and what some practical ways of doing that.
Shout out Caroline. She was like, hey, I want you guys to talk about this. And we were like, we got you. We'll talk about it.
So just reach out. Again, some of the stuff we're not experts on. So we'll do the research for you.
On most of the stuff we're not experts on.
Yeah, we're not experts at all at anything. But we're going to give our best advice. We're going to give our experience, and we're going to share that with you. And, again, most of this we kind of practice ourselves. But there are some things, again, that we just forget to talk about.
We can be challenged and stretched in a lot of areas that we don't know because we're learning and we're growing, and it's fun for us to do this. So
we are young 24-year-olds, 25-year-olds.
I'm 25.
I'm going to be 24. I'm 24. We're learning.
You'll be 25 in a few months.
But we're excited. You guys just keep submitting stuff because, again, there's so many things that we already practice in our daily lives that we just don't think about. Yeah. And if you guys just say, like, hey, a topic that we haven't talked about, let us go ahead and talk about it because, again, there's so many things we don't think about that we're like, oh, we could easily talk about that. We have a brain that only works 2 times and we need 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So,
all right, you guys, we will see you in 2 weeks. Have a great Memorial Day and thanks for listening.
Later.